Hispanic family. My mother is from Puerto Rico. Anybody in the, no Puerto Ricans in the audience? Oh,
what?
I gotta leave.
Wow.
All right, I'm representing. My mother is from Puerto Rico and my father is from Cuba. There we go. All right. So we certainly had a very interesting, passionate dynamic in the household as I was growing up. But very passionate about technology. As Sid mentioned, I entered into the technology space in an early part of my career and have been in the technology space, oh my God, I'm not even going to say the number. Let's just say more than 25 years. I'm a golfer, for those that cheered on the golf. You did, you knew that, you knew that. I'm a golfer, I am a wine connoisseur, and I am a human rights activist. So certainly things that I care very deeply about. And of course, I care very deeply about the next generation behind me and mentoring young ladies in their career, not only for STEM, but for corporate board membership as well.
Great. So you've achieved a level of success, dating back to your work with Comcast, NBC Universal, and being there, and now with Digital Hands, and as Sid mentioned, with the several board positions that you have. Did you have a strategy that you used to navigate that corporate ladder? And if so, could you tell us a little bit about it?
So I'm going to be the first person to share that there is no strategy. There is obviously plans, there is obviously things that I cared about and aspired to, but if you were to have pulled me aside, 20 years ago and said, you're going to serve on 3 corporate boards and you're going to do the following types of roles in corporate America, I would have said, nah, never. And I say that because my formal education is actually in psychology. So the fact that I went from being a psychology major, an organizational psychology graduate student, and then of course later on I received my MBA into tech and then into some of the fields that I went into, in particular cybersecurity, it really came at the advent of opportunities that many of the leaders that I was surrounded by encouraged me to take some risks and to flex on certain roles. You've probably heard this 1,000 times about taking risks, work out of your comfort zone, take on opportunities and take on tasks that are not the normal thing in your career path. And I'm here to tell you that's exactly what happened to me and was, quite honestly, the seeds for the success that I've been able to acquire. In particular, when I was asked, and we can go into this a little bit later or later on this evening, when I was asked to pivot my role within the technology realm into cybersecurity, I was terrified. I was like, I did not want to do it. I was against it. I actually felt that it was a recipe for disaster, all those things that your belly tells you this is not good. And I'm here to tell you it was the best thing I ever did in my career. But I didn't choose it. I got pushed into it. So a lot of times those opportunities come, they're presented, you overthink it, you overanalyze it. But I was grateful that I had a leader that said, I believe in you and I know that you can do this. And I thank him, gentlemen, every day for doing that.
And so would you consider that leader more of a mentor, a sponsor, a combination of both? What would you say?
Yeah, I would say he was much more of a sponsor. Sure, there were opportunities for me to learn from him in a similar mentor type of relationship. But he was someone that, we talk about sponsors and the importance of sponsors. He is someone that I know now, I did not know then, would speak about me when I was not around, and speak about me as far as my potential and the opportunities that I should be taking and opening doors for me. And one of the things that I recognize with this particular gentleman, and quite honestly, many of the gentlemen in my career that have helped me a great deal, is that they were all sons of daughters. They all really cared about women in the workplace and advancing. And yes, there were a number of those gentlemen were Latino too.
So, I think last night we were also having a conversation about mentorship and sponsorship and even really allies, right? And so could you talk a little bit maybe about finding folks like that are not necessarily like us that can help advance our careers?
So I was at the MPL event,
MPL.
I'm sorry, Most Powerful Latina event last October. I'm sorry. We have this big chat group. We have this chat group on WhatsApp of all the MPLs, and that's, we all call each other MPLs. But I was at the Most Powerful Latina event back in October, and I did a small chat like this, and it wasn't rehearsed, but one of the moderators asked me a similar question. And as we were discussing it, what I'm about to share may sound a little selfish, but it was about finding the centers of power, finding the individuals that will have the opportunity and the influence to make an opportunity for you. And it doesn't mean that you're taking advantage of them, but it's about getting close to those centers of power so that you're recognized, you're seen, people understand who you are, be able to cite your name and say, so-and-so, oh, so-and-so would be great for this. Someone says, oh, I got a board position open. Say, oh my God, you know what? I met someone at the Empower Her event. She'd be a great candidate. Just an example of it. I think that is probably my one piece of advice. Obviously, you have mentors and people that have been in your career path or where you're aspiring to do. And even today, I have mentors still today, and I'm a mentor. But I think it's really important for us to invest in people, but also to understand where are those centers, where are those ecosystems that could open those doors for us, and where can we raise our hand and say, I'm here, think of me, I want to be part of this.
So let's talk a little bit about the MPL. I'm going to use the lingo now, like I'm one of them, but So
Future MPL.
So let's talk about the MPL a little bit. So tell us, what does it feel like to be number one on the MPL list? And did you have, some kind of, or could you share with the audience maybe your philosophy for success and how you became, number one on the MPL list?
So I will tell you, I had the pleasure of being named on the MPL list the first year, which was in 2017. And I think I was ranked like 30-something at that time. And I was tremendously honored to be on that list. It was the inaugural list. I was in the company of many of my great friends and incredible Latinas in the workplace. And then the second year, I moved up a couple of notches because of some of my work at Comcast. And then this past year, when I was ranked number one, I was like, how'd that happen? I swear to God, I was like, how'd that happen? And I will tell you that, like some of these accolades and recognitions, and I'm going to admit it, we're not always that great at communicating very well. I found out about it through someone who saw it published before I knew about it. So I get a message, hey, congratulations. I'm like, what? So I'll tell you, I was taken aback. I was tremendously humbled by that recognition. And when the criteria, because the criteria every year is updated and shared, one of the reasons why I was ranked number one is because of my current influence on my boards. So my 3 corporate boards and the magnitude of the market cap that those 3 boards represent, and some of the work that I'm doing in the venture capital space, which is related to the work that I'm doing right now at Digital Hands. But I will tell you, never in my wildest dreams did I think I was going to be ranked number one, and I know that is a distinction that is not sustainable. Next year, someone else will be number one, and I'll be glad to see who that is. But I'll tell you, my philosophy as far as my career and things of that nature has really been about that simple adage of do good and you will do well. Who are you serving? What are you trying to accomplish? Make sure it's mission-driven, purpose-driven, and have a very servant leadership philosophy about what you do. I think it's extremely important. And one of the things that I am very proud of, and now I'm going to sound really arrogant and very arrogant, is what I'm really proud of is the fact that, I meet so many people and they're like, wow, you serve on 3 corporate boards and you're this and you're that. And then they say, wow, she's just like everybody else. Yep, just like everybody else. We're all cut from the same cloth. What's that saying? You put your pants on one leg at a time and shoes at one time. There is no real distinction here. Honored to be on that list. But I'm just doing what I love to do, and I'm happy to be contributing the way that I am.
So you've opened the door to talk about the board service.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about board service. And currently serving on 3 boards, right? CMS Energy, Spirit Air, and Banco Popular, right?
Correct.
So what was that like? Tell us a little bit about what you think got you on those positions, and what practical skills or practical advice could you give to our audience about how maybe they can? You know, they've been going through the NACD boot camp this morning and have had conversations about getting on board. So in your experience, what was it like, and what would you share?
Sure. First and foremost, I hope that you understand the pleasure of having NACD and ACED partner with one another. I think it's an incredible organization. I'm a governance fellow with NACD. I've been a member of NACD since I started my board service, and I think it's an incredible organization, not only to prepare you, but the continuous education as a board member, because you're constantly sharpening the knife. But my road into board service was interesting. There was a very deliberate desire to be on a board. I'm going to violate every rule that a woman does and talk about age. I was at a moment in my career where I set myself a visual goal and said, I want to be on a corporate board by the age of 50. That was like kind of my vision board. And I started to converse with a number of executive headhunters to make sure that they understood that that was my interest. And I heard every reason why that was going to be really hard, and all the reasons why, and Myrna, you're too young. And I'm like, too young, love you. Going through all the reasons why it couldn't be done. But I kept making sure the powers of influence at the time knew of my interests and I made them aware of the things that I was accomplishing and the things that I was making great progress on, because when it comes to board service, companies will seek out a board member and they'll always have a profile. Here's what we're looking for. And usually they're complementing the rest of the board dynamic. And you don't want to assume that people know what you've accomplished. You got to tell them. You know that old saying, toot your horn? I got a big horn. I toot it all the time. But it's really important to make sure people know what you're doing. And so I spent a lot of time talking to the headhunters that would call me to recruit me out of my job. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not interested in leaving my job, but can you help me with board search? And the answer was always like, oh, that's not what I do, but I'll refer you to my colleague that's part of board search practice. Long story short, my first board appointment came from the traditional board search, executive search process. They were looking for a technologist. They didn't say they were looking for a woman. They didn't say they were looking for a Latina. They were looking for a technologist. And one of the search firms presented the opportunity to me. It was a perfect opportunity because I worked at the time for Comcast. And Comcast, many of you, you all know them for video distribution and internet, but I still say we, once part of a team, always part of a team. It's true. We owned and operated 54 different businesses. So you can't serve on a board that may be in conflict with your business. So the energy company came calling. I was like, yes, no conflict. This is a great opportunity. Went through a very long and laborious interview process. I don't know if your boot camp has gone through that process yet, but it's long. You think about the times board members meet, every quarter. Sometimes there's iterative phone calls. So it took almost a year for the process to happen. And it wasn't until the board met me that they realized that they wanted a technologist with cybersecurity experience. Like, they didn't even think about it. But as I went through kind of like my accomplishments, they were like, oh, we need that. They didn't know it, but they recognized it when they saw it. And that's a little bit of a adage for you all to think about is when there's this profile that comes out, don't rule yourself out. More often than not, they really don't know what they need until they see it. So that was my first board appointment. An incredible organization. I feel very grateful that I joined the board of a very mature company, 125 years in business, very strong governance, incredible pedigree for the rookie board member to join. And since then, about 2 years after that, I was recruited for Spirit Airlines, and it wasn't until I departed my executive role at Comcast that I had the opportunity to join the board of Popular Inc. Popular Inc. operates under Banco Popular and Popular Bank. For those of you that may be in the New York, New Jersey area and have recognized Popular Bank.
Great. So I want to talk a little bit about something that you just mentioned, and sort of in passing, it was just being the Hispanic voice on the board, right? And so I think there's a delicate balance between your skill set and the level of expertise that you bring, but then also representing that Hispanic voice. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
So I got a funny story. I don't know how much time we have because I don't want to suck up too much time, but a funny story about they don't know what they want until they see it. So when I joined that first board, I had a very unique experience during one of my, probably like the third board meeting. And we had our board meetings at the time at a particular location, ballroom situations like this. And there were a number of ladies that were assisting with cleaning up the room. And I had an opportunity to recognize that one of them was Hispanic. And I said, gracias, and I struck up a conversation with them. And I had a couple board members look at me like, they're like, what? Like, you speak Spanish? And I'm like, yeah. grew up in a Hispanic household, yes. And they're like, we had no idea. It was a very interesting revelation. Very interesting revelation. They had no idea. Like, in other words, that gave me a bit of validation that I got that board seat not because I was a Latina. I got that board seat because I was the right candidate. And by default, I just happened to be Latina. Because that's really what we want. We want the doors to be open to us. And yes, we do need to have a very concentrated effort for companies to say, I would like to see Hispanic candidates. But I will tell you, the Hispanic voice on the board, with the exception of Banco Popular, because everybody is Hispanic on that board, it's been an interesting experience because the demographic of our customers represent, in both of these other companies, represent such a large Hispanic population, even in Michigan, which is where CMS operates, and then of course Spirit Airlines, where we fly to many areas and have crews across the country. It is a bit of a obligation, right? And it's a bit of a challenge because you want to make sure that they're thinking about our community. They want to make sure that they're thinking about the demands and needs. And I use that word demands because we are consumers and we have purchasing power and we can choose to spend where we need to spend. But it's a burden because you're in the room and you're bringing up topics and you're bringing up things that you want to make sure the rest of the board understands. And just the same way they looked at me like, you speak Spanish, right? It's like, really? Yeah, really, this is important. But I have a ton of, I say fun, I have a ton of fun carrying that flag without making it the only agenda item, right? Because at the end of the day, we want it to just be part of the agenda, not the Hispanic agenda, but the agenda that recognizes people of color, the agenda that recognizes our community and what we represent, and our buying power as a consumer, and really just the rights of us as a community. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I think so. So I want you all to be thinking about your questions. I'm going to come to the audience in just a few moments, but in the meantime, I'm going to ask one more. So, a lot of the work that HISAIR does is about board representation. We track trends. We've looked at the numbers, the last 20 plus years, and we've seen minimal change, sadly, in terms of the number of Hispanics who are serving on corporate boards. So what do you think the biggest challenge is to moving that needle, to seeing greater representation of the Hispanic population?
So I think one of the biggest challenges are some of the things that this group is already trying to address. And that is, I'm going to use a term that some people may not appreciate, but it's really about board readiness, right? So it's galvanizing the experiences that you have as executives in your various industries and making sure that the readiness of each and every person in this room to be considered a candidate is formative, so that we can come back at the marketplace, because this is what it's about, to say, no, this is someone that's gone through the board boot camp. This is someone who is part of NACD and is on a governance track. all the things that they're going to be looking for in a board member. I think we as a community historically, not now, historically, we didn't have that galvanized effort to do that. We didn't have the right focus, the association's focus to say, hey, I've got a great executive here, here, and here. Be great for your board. Consider them. And we're creating that now. We need to continue to create that. And we do need to, I'm going to choose my words wisely here, demand it. We need to demand it. We need to say, hey, I'm a consumer. I buy from you. Why am I not represented on your board? Right? And it's not just those of us that want to be on the board, but it's also those around us that are going to partake in services or products or whatever the company does. At the end of the day, that board needs to represent the demographic of the customer. And we were chatting right before this about the United States being, how was it, the largest Hispanic population, second largest Hispanic population on the globe. Hello, why is that not translating into the proper representation in the board? You'll hear all the things. Well, they're not ready, they don't have this, they don't have that. No, we gotta get a shot. It's about you can have everything, you just can't have everything at the same time. So when you think about all the things that you want or that you aspire to, there is no shame in saying, you know what, I'm gonna do that later because this is important to me. I'm gonna do that later because this is important, or I'm gonna do that now because that's more important than this, or I've prioritized whatever. But the concept of doing everything at the same time, it's just, I don't believe in it. And it's not a popular statement because, you know, I am very supportive of women that have families and are working but the reality is that we have to make choices and we have to have that support system around us to allow us the flexibility to lean into these other roles and expanding roles. I won't lie to you, I'm tired often. I mean, there's just a lot to be done, but it's also, you know, a personal choice. I run at a certain pace, and I have for the greater part of my life. That will not last forever, for obvious reasons. You know, things will start to change and slow down, and that's completely fine. But I think it's really important for you all to consider that there really is no work-life balance. It's about what we choose and what we want to prioritize. And there's no shame in prioritizing some things, personal things, over work.
Okay. It's on? Okay. Cynthia Pastuskovas from Merck, the biotech. And what I see, and I don't know what is your impression, Myrna, in terms of Latinos and especially in the corporate world, we have different kind of generations.
Yes.
And I believe strongly that we are not unified. I think that in my 20 years in the US, this is the first time that I see that we are all come together with a common goal. But as you mentioned before, you said you were selected for your skills, not because you were Latina. And in my case, I know that many times I have the skills, but I'm not selected because I have an accent, because I don't express myself in the way that the people would like or expect me to express. So how do you see from your experience that first generation of Latinos, how they are included? I see sometimes put in different places just because they need somebody different, but not exactly because they are ready to listen to what I have to say.
So I asked before if there was anybody from the press in the room, and I was told no. So I'm going to answer this very genuinely and very transparent. Not scientifically proven, but if I look at the Latinos that have served on corporate boards historically, they have a similar trait. They were either a previous CEO of a company or ran for, you know, there are different criterias. One thing that I think is changing right now is it used to be that articulation and having a formative dialect in English seem to be a really big deal. I'm not seeing that anymore. I really am not. I mean, I'm looking at candidates today for one of our boards, and there are candidates that we are considering that are extremely formative that we will have to learn to be able to follow some of the pronunciation and enunciation of speech. But the skill sets that that person brings by far outweighs any type of concern. I often feel a bit of a hypocrite at times because people say, "Oh, are you Latina? You speak English so well." Well, I speak Spanish too. You know, it's something that I think that we as a community and as the Fortune X, they're opening themselves up to much, much more. And I don't think that stigma is legitimate any longer. I don't even know if it was legitimate ever. You could presume by looking at some of the folks that have served on boards and hearing them speak, myself included, that you say, wow, they spoke English really well. I don't see that stigma at all. I think a bigger stigma, which is also changing, is the thought that you can only get on a board if you were a previous CEO or some other level. When I joined my first board, I was the first CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, to be appointed a public board. I didn't even know that. Like, I learned that later on. Someone said, "You know that you're the first one?" I'm like, great. I love being the trailblazer, but why didn't you tell me? I would have marketed that a little bit more. But the reality is that I'm seeing such a big movement, and I think that it's a very positive movement. But I think when you look at board service, and I'm sure you guys are going to talk about this a lot more, when you look at board service, there's a skill set that there will be the principal skill set that you bring as your subject matter expertise. But every board wants a really rounded candidate, someone that's had exposure to various areas, various industries. The subject matter expertise may get you the interview, may get you considered, but really the Nom and Gov committee is going to say, yeah, but has the person had any experience on mergers and acquisitions? Have they ever done this? Have they ever done that? So my advice is genuinely, and I tell you this wholeheartedly, don't worry about your accent. Your skill set and how that's marketed to potential prospects is the most important thing. And by the way, I understood everything you said perfectly.
So we have time for one more question. Who's it going to be?
Yo.
Joy.
Hola, soy Yvette Peña with AARP out of Washington, D.C. Gracias, Myrna and Lisette, for being these poderosa, inspirational women. I'm so honored to be here. Yesterday, we heard from Geisha Williams about the difference between mentors and sponsors. We didn't get to ask questions, so it stayed in my mind, and I heard you mention, I even wrote it down, finding our centers of power, that ecosystem. What advice do you have when you have a lot of mentors and they're high up and you choose them, right, and they accept you? But how do you get to that sponsorship level? Because I'm going to speak personally, I'm at a point where I think I'm there. I really need that sponsor to help with that little nudge. How does that happen, and what can I do to get there? And maybe some others have that same question. I'm just very curious.
Sure. So if I may say something about Geisha. Geisha used to be number one, and I have not seen her since, and I'm like, honey, you're still number one in my book. She's an incredible lady, running an incredible power company, and now she's off to other things. But here's the thing about sponsors. This is my opinion. There's like no right answer. Sponsors are unknown. You can't say, hey, I want you to be my sponsor. Hey, I'd like for you to be my sponsor. Sponsors are not chosen, they're not picked, they're not solicited. They're people that have had exposure to you that, unbeknownst to you, will say, Yvette would be perfect for this. Or, wow, Yvette did a phenomenal job in X. And I have found that some of the best ways to procure or to create sponsorship is to be a sponsor yourself. That you not only sponsor yourself, but that you sponsor others. I truly believe in the pay it forward mentality, And I believe that when we spend time helping others, it comes right back. It comes right back to us. But I would be very cautious, to think of a sponsor, and there's very informal sponsors. Like you have no idea the impact of, think about Sid and Ased. Sid is an incredible sponsor of this community, right? Now, he's not saying, hey, I'm your sponsor, but he'll be out there saying, hey, I met so-and-so was at my event, so-and-so participated here, went through board boot camp, would be a great person for you to keep an eye on. I'm keeping an eye on her. You know what I'm saying? So these are the types, being part of groups like this, being part of associations, and helping others. I mean, often I have turned down, and Sid knows this because he and I are constantly texting and going back and forth. I've turned down solicitation for certain boards because I'm already committed, and I'll send them, hey, do you know of anybody? And we'll put the name network out there, and we'll do the telephone game. Or, hey, I got a nonprofit. Do you think you would be interested in this? But one of the things if we're going to talk purely about board service, is get involved in a nonprofit, sit on a nonprofit board. When I say sit, shame on me. Shame on me. Never use that word. Sit. Serve. Serve on a nonprofit. Serve on a private board. Really cut your teeth in that board type of experience. And don't discount it because they look for that. They really do. I had the pleasure of serving on the Hispanic IT Executive Council Board as one of our nonprofit boards, a great partner of ASED. And I'm saddened that I had to roll off of that because I reached my term limit. Time went by so fast. But it's a great example of an organization that opened up, that governance door for me. And I think you have some sponsors in this room.